girls, welcome to 2022, or what the document says 2021 update. We are now going to go to the second part of the update. In the previous one, we talked about Lannister, Night Watch, Stark, and Neutral. We're going to go through the rest of the updates right now. Free Folk, Targaryen, as well as Baratheon. I think Baratheon especially will be extremely hot going into 2022, and of course we'll be talking about some of the base rule changes and some of the game modes changes. I got here with me Brett. I think Brett has been quite influential in some of these changes. And how do you feel so far about the changes, Brett?
To be honest, and maybe it's pie in the sky, and I generally tend to be a bit positive for the most part. Anyway, since the mysterious FAQ came out yesterday in the middle of the day, ever since that moment, I feel like this is the best update ever.
Ooh.
Now, I felt, even before that update, that we were looking at something really good, right? The 2021 was a vast improvement over 1.6, but it still had hiccups. You cover these changes and you can see that they've learned from some mistakes. It looks like they've given it a very, very deep look, and it seems like they've actually looked at it through the lens of what's being abused, what is really common, competitive tournament meta. How can we stop some of these cookie cutter list building? And it looks like they addressed it. You already covered Lannisters yesterday, so they didn't just do a lazy nerf and make poor fellows 5 points. They adjusted the morale. To me, that indicates that they recognize just how prominent poor fellows with Champion of Faith are. They increased that risk factor. They made it a little bit difficult to pass that morale test. I'm pretty happy with everything that they've done.
Yep.
And as far as influence goes, anybody listening, I just talk. I just talk on social media, and occasionally the developers get in and listen, but I'm not entirely sure I directly influenced it or not. But I think the best thing anybody can do is just talk. You approach it, and you can express grievances, but I think you approach it respectfully, and you back it up with a little bit of data, kind of flying off the handle and just going on and on about something without ever backing it up doesn't do any good. Mm-hmm. So if you're finding something in your local meta that's abusive, definitely bring it up and talk about it, like on Discord and social media. The developers do kind of lurk, and they don't ever know necessarily that there's a problem until it's pointed out. So I always encourage people to just engage, stay friendly, and communicate what's going on. And you never know, you might be heard, and it might influence some of the changes.
So we're gonna go through the rest of the factions here with sort of like the thing that I did for the previous one, sort of just going through like what makes this faction sort of tick in 2021. Why was it sort of well, not necessarily why is it picked, but more like what are some of the key strengths? What are some of the things that is a bit above the curve, and what are the things that's not being used, especially in things like Free Folk. So we're gonna go with the faction that Brett probably hates the most. So we're gonna go straight to Free Folk. All right, hitting this off with like the most interesting ones in the list. All right, Free Folk. So Free Folk in 2021, we're seeing it's not a lot of it being played in some of the highest level of competition. I know some people like Maserat do bring Free Folk on like a regular basis and plays and pilots them extremely well, but we're not exactly seeing Free Folk somewhere near the top over like Night's Watch and Targaryen, who's sort of in the top. But in hands of a good players, Free Folk, especially the insignificant lists, we got the core of Raiders, with Spearwives, I think like being some of the most dangerous unit for 5 points. In the hands of like someone's really good, I think Free Folk can make it, and we'll see what's interested in Free Folk now with this update. So we'll start first with the Walrus Clan Chieftain, ability Iron Resolve added. Design notes: resilience in most armies would be 2 points on its own. Free Folk are not most armies, with their focus on cheap and expendable units, oftentimes increasing units' durability. Didn't make much sense in favor of just including another unit. By adding Iron Resolve, increasing the unit's survivability and making it a threat. So this is a straight upgrade, to Walrus Clan Chieftain. They used to be just 2 points with resilience, and now they added resilience plus Iron Resolve. So not only you're getting that half a wound from the hit, You're also getting like -1 to the panic test and +1 to the morale. Um, so now 5 points Raider with Walrus Clan Chieftain might be played here because with the whole adaptability is now -1. But what are some of the thoughts of the Walrus Clan Chieftain? Like, because I know that resilience is one of those ability that's sort of people get nervous about, and now you're adding Iron Resolve on top of it. I know it doesn't. It's not an attachment that rings anyone's bell. But what are some of your thoughts on why we're adding this ability to the Clan Chieftain?
To be honest, I think it's actually pretty scary. I think the obvious choice is to stick the guy in Raiders. It's a good, budget tank. You're gonna have the Raiders testing for panic on a 6, taking 1 less wound, which effectively just washes out disorganized. But being frank, being honest and transparent here, you're seeing Mance almost always competitively.
Mm-hmm.
So suddenly the Raiders are effectively testing panic on a 4, and they're having hits from melee and ranged attacks, whichever one they choose, because it's an order. But more importantly, being able to transfer this order to another unit with coordination tactics. Now, I know the general strategy with coordination tactics is to use it proactively, increase your offense output. But there could be some plays where you transfer resilience over to one of your heavy hitters and soften up that hit quite a bit. And transferring resilience as well as Iron Resolve could be pretty good in some situations. Mm-hmm. And then following that same line of thinking, I know the obvious spot is Raiders, but I think at that point the Raiders just become sort of an anvil. That you're not going to engage them unless you have to. It's just a very, very, very obvious tar pit. What you could do is put him in the Thins, and I know people are going to bulk at the 7 points, but Thins now carry hold the line. So if you're able to get them engaged with your Thins and keep the Thins alive and at full ranks, taking 5 hits when they activate is really going to put a dent in a number of things. Now, as we know from previous coverages of the rules, hold the line is going to bypass things like harden. It's going to get around things like agile. It's going to get around things like disrupt. It's going to help you push through some of those units that are otherwise very, very, very problematic for free folk. Free folk don't want to be fighting like Night's Watch veterans because they're mostly hitting them on 5s. They're taking a hit for every miss. So if you can get rid of them by using hold the line and things like this, you're in a much better spot to deal with a unit like that. I like also for Follower of Bones, same concept in a Mance list. You're testing it effectively at morale 4. Followers of Bone are actually pretty scary. They're not exactly setting the world on fire with their offensive profile, but thanks to their vicious and horrific visage, they can definitely do some panic damage. You start to pair that with There's Too Many, and on their attack, they can end up taking a panic test at -6, and it's doing D3 plus 3 wounds. It's pretty nasty. You now have I can't remember exactly what they called it. Idle means death, I think,
yep.
Or something like this. So you're going to have some situations where you're essentially forcing them to attack your Followers of Bone, or they're retreating, which can be to your benefit as well. So I like this guy, obviously in Raiders as a budget tank, but I like him in Thins, and I like him in Followers of Bone as well to kind of shore up some weaknesses from your offensive potential units.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, again, for me, it's always that 2 points in Free Folk as an attachment is a premium. I think like the only, well, right now, like the two most viable one is Harma because of the clear synergy that she has with Spearwives, and also Tormund because Warcry is such a universal ability that I think it's worth 2 points. Anyway, cool. So that was the Walrus Clan Chieftain. Now the Chosen of Steer. Again, another sort of unused attachment in 2021. Mobility, Stand Your Ground removed, and now it has Go Down Fighting. Stand Your Ground was a means for units to be slightly more durable when facing a charge. Durability, however, is not a hallmark of Free Folk, and often the damage save here would not be worth the investment of the attachment. As these units were typically only charged once, we have changed it to Go Down Fighting, which has more versatility in the unit's purpose and giving it some bite when inevitably attacked and taken down. Quite a straightforward here. Like nobody was using Chosen of Steer because the ability is so corner case. I think the def notes here it literally just describes why is it a problem, and I think Go Down Fighting will add some interesting spin to it because again, as what the dev has mentioned, your units will die. It's just a matter of when they're dying, they'll take someone with them as well. So I think this is a nice buff or a nice change in general. I think we don't need to focus too much on this one. The next one though, the Weeper Cruel Tyrant, cost reduced from 2 to 1. Much like the Walrus Clan Chieftain, the Weeper's abilities will make a fine place in other armies, but here he was just proving to be a bit too expensive for what we'll typically see from a Free Folks unit / attachment. This is probably a sleeper hit, yeah. I look at it and go, alright, so now you have a Raider unit, 4 points Raider unit with the Weeper, and now it can output some panic damage, panic token in short range, as well as having fishes to basically trigger off things like there's too many. I think this is a sleeper buff, really. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I think this is a sleeper buff. I'm not sure, because right now, a typical Free Folk list will have sort of like a Raider with Torment for the Warcry, and then you have another Raider with Raid Leader just sort of with the synergy. But now I'm seeing Raider with Weeper might see play now because of it's now essentially free in Raiders. So yeah, what do you think, Brett?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's one that might fly under the radar a little bit, but this goes along with Reek going to 0 points for the neutrals, which, in my opinion, it might be combed through and like just everybody's focusing on cutthroats and things like this, but those changes are big. I think the Weeper will definitely have a spot. Free Folk are definitely, whether they like that or not, they're definitely still a panic faction. Their goal, outside of the previous Spearwife one-shot big wombo combo, their goal was to get a wound or two, force a panic test, force enough panic test to eventually result in failure. The Weeper is obviously just going to help that happen. He's adding Vicious, and the bubble panic ability is pretty good. The most popular Free Folk choices, outside of Spearwives, of course, are going to be panic focused. You've got Mag the Mighty, who's a very, very powerful solo. He has Vicious. You've got the Chariot. When it's charging, it brings Vicious. Followers of Bone are pretty popular-ish.
Yep.
They kind of compete with Spearwives, but they do pop in. They are bringing Vicious as well as Horrific Visage. And now the Giant has Vicious, if you choose to take the Giant or not. And then, of course, just all of the chip damage from Raiders, Trappers still shooting into combat, getting 1 or 2 wounds in, forcing a panic test. I think it's going to really up their panic game. Now, you do obviously still have Warcry from Torment. I think everybody's getting Warcry wherever they can, Free Folk being no exception. But you can play around with when you trigger Warcry now. I think we can all agree that there's been situations where we used Warcry, we didn't need to expend the vulnerable token, but we spent the panic token. Then, the next round we have to time when we're going to use Warcry. Is it worth it to kind of waste that vulnerable token to get the panic token back? Now you could potentially have the option of the 1-2 punch with Torment and the Weeper to get that panic token back on them and push through your most reliable source of damage, which is the panic.
Yep. And I think the angle is a little bit different because Raider with Raid Leader obviously will give you an extra attack as well as giving a +1 to hit. Weeper might not hit that much, but he does bring Vicious, which will proc There's Too Many, and it will also synergizes with things like Follower of Bones, slash Bone Lord's Chosen if you're playing a Rattle Shirt. Yeah, no, 1 point is great. I think I'm definitely going to test him, and I'm really happy. We got a chat from Crispy Gameplay saying so much Vicious, make it stop. Unfortunately, Giants now also have Vicious, so it's just more Vicious up the wazoo with Giants having Vicious. But let's go through that in a little bit. The next thing is from Steer with Final Strike. So Final Strike has received some wording changes. Back then, it's a bit of a meme where you have Final Strike and then you kill the unit, then the Final Strike did not trigger. So now it just says, after an enemy completes a melee attack, for each wound the defender suffered, the attacker suffers 1 hit. If the defender was in long range of Steer's unit, the enemy suffers -1 to defense dice roll against these hits. So the wording on this Final Strike is actually a bit different from the ones in the Baratheon one, yeah? Because the Baratheon one has the crown component, but this one is in long range of steers unit. Well, what's up? I mean, it's a bit semantic, just two cards having the same name but just different effects. Is it possible that it's going to be streamlined, or is it a fully intentional design from like the?
I don't. I don't know. I think they like it actually. You had Last Stand in the previous version, and Last Stand gave you a buff on the dark side if you were an Umber unit, and then Last Stand gave you a buff on the Baratheon side when you had the crown. I think they do like this crown and letters for Baratheons. Can be a little bit frustrating for a Baratheon player because there's not a huge amount of incentive to take the crown, but I think they're sticking with that trigger because they like it.
So just like the first, so just -1 if something happens, yeah, sort of like the template.
Yeah. And I think the Free Folk one is a little bit easier to pull off than the Baratheon one, actually. Being in long range of steer shouldn't be horribly hard to do. So, that's a nasty final strike. And it's kind of a case of...
So if the one that was being destroyed is steer's unit, they don't get the -1, right? Because it's no longer...
It would trigger after the attack's completed, and I think at that point steer would be gone.
Yeah.
So no, it wouldn't get the benefit.
Yeah.
I mean... If it said something like, before removing this unit, it would work that way.
Yeah.
But it doesn't.
So I think like just the update to Final Strike in general, it removed it from like a meme going like, oh no, if you kill me in one shot, the Final Strike will not trigger, into now going like, yes, please kill me now so I can deal like 10 auto hits to you. I like these changes. I think it's what we wanted, and I think it has been delivered finally. So, really happy to get this change in Final Strike. So those are the changes in the unit attachment cards. So now we're going to be looking at the changes from the unit perspective. So let's start first with Free Folk Trappers. Hidden Traps modified. I think this one was just a universal buff. We're seeing it in Cranoxmen, we're now seeing it in Trappers, and I think we're seeing it also in Mira Reed. It's just a universal update. Now in full rank, they deal 4 auto hits. Also, if you don't want to deal the auto hits, you can also make them suffer like -1 movement. So, I think it's just an overall good change. Mans with Trappers now will deal 4 auto wounds instead of 3. So, scary. But I don't think we're gonna see more than like 1 Trappers per list, though. I think like Trappers in general is in an okay spot-ish. It's just that it's sort of like a midway unit between like usability and not. And I think for Mans especially, is just the unit that he resides in. I don't think there will be like at least 2 Trappers, 3 Trappers. I don't see Trappers being more than 1 in a unit. But I'm not sure like whether people will try out like 3 Trappers and just like force the opponent to go, you know what, go ahead. But what do you think of this changes? Do you? Because I know you don't like Trappers because it used to deal auto wound, but now it just deal auto hits.
Yeah, I think the Trapper change was relatively good and fair. It gives you more consistency, particularly when the enemy is more healthy. It doesn't leave you at the mercy of the D3 like the old Trappers did. Definitely. They turned my brain into scrambled eggs before because you have to move to play the game, and taking those auto wounds, it was really tough. But this version is probably a bit more fair. I can definitely, though, I can see some instances where if the Disrupt Counterstrike becomes kind of a meta pick, right, because of the idol is death, I can see cases where Free Folk would maybe want 2 or 3 units of Trappers, and it's not just for the Hidden Traps, which Hidden Traps will do a number on those units that are built with Disrupt and Counterstrike because they're built with poor defense or average. I guess Veterans 4+ is average, but the Skirmishers are a 5+ defense, so the Trappers are going to do a number on Bloody Mumber Skirmishers. But it's not just for that. If this negative to hit, weakened when you're engaged meta becomes a thing, you will want just the ranged attack. And if you can still get yourself in a position with things like diversion tactics or just smart deployment as a free folk player, you can definitely get some pot shots off with the Trappers. We've seen from Greyjoy Bowman, granted they're a long-range unit, but hitting on 4+s with 6 dice, it's not the end of the world. You can and will do some damage. If you're mixing that up with the Weeper's Panic tokens, you can definitely do some work with Trappers. Is it going to be the best, most popular choice? Maybe not. I don't know, but I see a pretty nice synergy with running a 2 or 3 Trapper list with Styre Commander. And getting that final strike off, because let's face it, they're going to go after the Trappers. Nobody likes to be trapped. When they're shooting, trapped when they're moving, they're going to try to go for those Trappers, and it could set you up for a nice final strike. So I can see some cases where there would be merit to kind of spamming Trappers to a lesser degree than you saw in 1.6, but 2 to 3 could definitely be playable.
Yep. Fair enough. Alright, Savage Giant. This is a straight up buff. Fishes added to Mighty Swing. Design notes. Giants needed a small increase in the damage department, independent of their wounds. Plus, it's probably terrifying to fight a giant. Again, it's just a straight buff. I mean, back then, for a 7-point unit, it can deal like, 2 wounds at the very minimum. If it has like full rank. So you roll like a D. Let's check like how much damage the giants did. I don't remember. It is... Yeah, it's just D3 wound. So, at worst with a giant, you're dealing only 1 wound. Now with fishes, like, it's somehow added to the proc of the hit. So, you can deal like some damage as well with the fishes proc. So, yeah. Straight up buff. I think it's gonna be... I still don't believe in the usage of giant outside of like some Mac the Mighty list, simply because it's a requirement sort of to bring giants. But yeah, I think this is fine. Probably Giants could use maybe like 1 more buff to make it viable. Simply, I still don't like the fact that it can still suffer 2 wounds from panic damage, from panic tests, while having only a morale 5. Which means that, you could like take 1 wound and then randomly fail panic, and then you suffer 3 wounds, and then there's, halfway to you dying. But yeah. What do you think of the Savage Giant, Brett? I personally don't see it. It's a straight buff, but it's still not putting it in the realms of playability, I feel, at least for like the competitive scene. But maybe you have a different thoughts.
I think it could be playable. I don't think he's bad anymore. Adding the vicious is a little subtle buff, and with that said, it's still a relatively tanky unit. You mentioned the panic damage. I get it. It's definitely a thing that can happen, but it's maybe a little bit less severe for them, because you're probably still going to see a lot of flayed men, and at that point the INT presence is just guaranteeing 2 wounds. It's not going to get you the 4 or more if you're playing like Lannisters and adding panic damage to it. The giant is still pretty tanky. I think it gives you a reason to bring Craster, which you're maybe bringing Craster if you run Mag the Mighty anyway. If you don't have the points for Mag, I could see squeezing a giant in. I think their strength isn't necessarily in what they can kill. I think their strength is scaring the opponent away from even attacking them. So I think you can kind of create a no-go zone, and they're still very, very, very good at contesting objectives. Now, I know without the commander scoring double victory points, holding and contesting objectives isn't the biggest thing in the world, but there's definitely still merit to engaging a unit with the giant and at least stopping them from scoring. If they don't attack you, I guess you won't get your buffs, but they could be forced to retreat away from you. The giant's tray is able to pivot. Basically, it can change its facing. You could potentially get him involved elsewhere. He's not like an auto-include. He's maybe a little bit tricky to use, but I think he still has a spot. I think he could see some play. I'd have to really dig through the Free Folk Tactics deck to see who has the best synergy with a giant.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a Torment, yeah, because he has the counter charge. But I think like the role of giant in a Torment list is sort of supplanted by Mac, because he simply has more stats, and you're essentially paying a couple more points for like a very competent combat unit. You already have like a huge damage from like the get go, while giants sort of like can tank a little bit. Well, even in the tanking department, it's slightly cheaper. Well, by slightly I mean 2 points. It's quite large, but at the same time, when you're buying Mac, you're essentially having a unit that can hit like 7 auto wounds, and then when it goes away, you deal another 7 auto wounds. So, it's giants are now sitting in sort of like an awkward position. I feel of just on the edge of being playable, but not really. And
They
yeah,
they do have a niche role. They can get around hardened, and they can get around the blind baron hardened
oh
Baylor
freaking
combo
blind
that
Baron.
I think you're going to see that one a lot. I've
Ah,
been
don't
hard on
don't
it.
no silence man with blind Baron. No.
God, yeah, I've been hard on it since they showed blind baron. I've been hard on Baylor since they showed that he had hardened. I immediately was like, Baylor silence man in your face. But I think you're going to see it a lot more.
Oh man.
And the giant does get around that combo. Um, it makes him
If
somewhat killable.
if freaking Mikael is watching the stream or watching the VOD, like, god damn it, Mikael, you're gonna be so excited with all the change. Like now, Greyjoy has like this thing, and yeah, I need to think of some ways to to get rid of that now, with the tools available. Anyway, yeah, so that's about the Giants. I think at the end of the day, it's sort of like for me, it's a unit that I will only see play in certain lists with Mac as like sort of like a requirement to bring like the cards, and yeah. So now we're going with the next unit, which is the War Mammoth. So Mammoth was utterly unplayable back in the previous edition. It simply does too little to do what it does. I kind of see where they were going with War Mammoth, because the previous version was just OP. You change any types of movements with trample, and you can get trample from marches, you can get trample from like Lady Val, you can get trample from anything, and then they change it to only march, and they reduce the damage. And now it's not being used, and I think the changes right now is just that it's now a competent combat unit. um, so this is a lot of changes, yeah. So we're looking at Mammoths. Unit has 8 wounds, cannot control objectives, suffers a maximum of 2 wounds from failing panic test, and before it is destroyed, you may target one enemy it is engaged to suffer D3 wounds. Speed of 6, 4 plus on 6 dice, 3 plus armor save, 6 plus morale, crit, sundering, panic before. This is a lot of text on like a unit. Jesus. Wow. So it's a unit. I think right now, how you would use the Mammoth. I don't remember how much a point a Mammoth is. Is it 6? It is 6, isn't it?
Yeah, he's 6 points.
Man, for 6 points, you're getting a lot of bargain for this unit. That's a lot of text for like a 6 pointer. Wow. Yeah, I think this is one of the biggest sort of change, I would say, to the War Mammoth. Back then, it was sort of like used to sort of just do trample, whatever its movement, etc. Now it's sort of a competent combat unit. It has good stats with crit blow and sundering, and that elusive 3 plus armor save on a free folk unit. And also, it can kill someone on the way out. If you're sort of attacking it with like a solo kills it off, or solo helps to finish it off, it can like randomly kill the solo, or it can like deal out damage enough to the unit that it's attacking. I'm gonna need to experiment a lot with this unit though. I think this is going to be I don't yet see how we can use it on the list, but I'm sure we can squeeze 6 points on the list, and we can do fine with the War Mammoth. So, what do you think, Brett? This is a lot of changes. I think I would like to see, first of all, like how or why do you think that Free Folk needs this type of unit, or sort of like how would you sort of use this unit in like a game?
I think the Mammoth is totally playable, actually. It's not just because he's got a real attack profile now. I'm thinking him with a raid leader, giving him 7 attacks, 3 plus to hit, critical blow, sundering. Now he can grind, but he's also just a good tank. Like 3 plus defense is hard to get through. Only being able to push through 2 wounds on panic is going to make him difficult. Even a unit like Flademan, they're charging, maybe they make the Mammoth vulnerable. It's very unlikely that they get the Mammoth in one go. you could potentially heal him back up. But I see the Mammoth seeing play, again, similar to the Giant. He will be good at contesting objectives. But if you get Raid Leader mixed in with him, he's definitely a very solid combat unit. 7 dice, 3+ critical blow sundering, and it's vicious as well, right?
Yep.
And
Oh
it
wait,
makes
no,
you
it doesn't
panic.
have it doesn't
Yeah.
have fishes, but it gives
Okay.
panic when it's attacking.
Okay. I mean, that's fine. That's fine. The 3+ to hit critical blow sundering with 7 dice is a pretty good, just standard attack profile for free folk. Now, I say standard; it requires setting up the raid leader, but I think it's pretty solid actually. As just a combat unit that's a little bit tanky.
Yeah.
Generally, free folk wear T-shirts for armor or something to that equivalent. I would welcome a 3+ defense. And then I think the maximum of 2 wounds from failing panic is a pretty good ability for anybody. I quite like it because the meta is still very much chip damage, force panic, chip damage, force panic, chip damage, force panic.
Yeah.
And
No.
having any panic defense, we've seen it with Khal Drogo, makes that unit increasingly more difficult to get rid of.
Yeah, I like it. Crispy Gameplay says the thematic mammoth that does D3 wounds to unit is engaged is also hilarious. Yeah, I mean, it's a freaking mammoth. You kill it, it topples down. It might squish you on the way out. At 6 points for sure. I think I need to basically test out this unit. I think this is a very powerful unit, and at 6 points, I think we can find some room in the list to fit in. All right, going to the next unit, and I think this is I can understand the nerf. I mean, I'm not angry or anything at the Spearwise. The coordinated assault has now been changed to just furious charge. Back then, it deals plus 3 auto hits. Well, 1 auto hit when charging based on the amount of rank left. Now it's just being nerfed to basically just vulnerable. Yeah, I mean, this is no questions really. Spearwise was just doing too much damage for a 5 points unit. It can shoot. It can charge with the charging volley of a sword, and then it deals six dice plus 3 auto hit, and yeah, it just deals too much damage on the charge. And I think the decision to sort of tone it down a bit with furious charge, I think it's an acceptable nerf. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I'm
I
sure Brett
agree.
will agree with
I
this. Yeah.
I think a lot of the free folkers are really lamenting this loss. I think it's not necessarily just that the damage potential was above the curve. I think the probably the bigger, more toxic issue that free folk brought was coordination tactics. So I think the free folk, or I think the spearwives on their own probably would have been fine. They probably would have slipped through. Again, I don't know because for everybody who doesn't know, all external playtesters were removed. So I don't have anything to do with playtesting anymore. I'm just not surprised, and I know with the mentality of the developers, they when we designed Free Folk initially in 2021, and I say we, I didn't design. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. When Michael and Fabio designed Free Folk for the 2021 update, I think the goal was to move away from just insignificant spam,
Mm-hmm.
give them a lot of versatile 5 point units, and see kind of a mixed bag. And this is where coordination tactics came in. It was a brand new card. It was a very, very cool design piece. And the idea was, well, we will have this mixed bag of units that do different cool things, and then we'll be able to spread those around, give some of these abilities to other 5 point units to really give them all of the keywords in some cases, or we'll give them to raiders and give the raiders a little bit of punch. I think that was what they envisioned, but I think what ended up happening was coordination tactics strictly became the wombo combo, where, oh, my spearwives are engaged. That's okay, because my raiders are coming in from the flank in
With
Flames
coordinated
Skywire.
assault,
They're
yeah.
bringing a raid leader with them. They're doing 8 dice, hitting on a 3+ with Sundering, and now they're getting auto hits from the spearwives as well. And I think that became so much the play that it was causing some of the other units to kind of be overlooked. And I think overall the goal of the developers is for every unit to be viable and to see some versatility in list building. And I think the point at which all free folk competitive lists included at least one spearwife, I think that's why this happened. not so much just that the combo was a little bit over the top. I think it was the combination of coordination tactics and just the fact that spear wives became essentially auto include, and this is kind of what happens. We've seen it before. I don't think it should be overly surprised, and I don't think free folk players should take it super personally.
Yeah.
Furious Charge is still very good anyway, so
So now what's interesting with Furious Charge is now you can, so usually like the opener play for Spear Wife, so you go War Cry into the unit that you want to kill. So now you can you can shoot 4 dice and then use the vulnerable on the spear toss before you charge in. So it's a potential for double dip on that note. So dealing like an extra like 1 or 2 wounds might be good to sort of soften up the unit. So yeah, I mean it. I agree that that was the play, and I think it was sort of very rewarding to play it. But at the same time, I can understand why it becomes an issue. You did mention coordinated the tactics. I still have personal disagreement of Greyjoy having access to it. I think it has a bit more room to have a bit of abuse, but I don't want to discuss that topic. And I think free folk are. I think this is fine. Free folk players shouldn't be too mad that Spearwife got a little bit of nerf. I think this is still acceptable. With some of the changes that we have, also, I think this is overall this too will pass, definitely. And lastly,
yeah,
on the
I don't.
yeah.
Sorry, I was just gonna say I don't see it as being. I don't see it as knocking free folk out of competitive contention and just making them this horrible faction. Like the sky's not falling. It's okay. We've seen nerfs before, and factions find a way to overcome. Might take a little bit of playing around and tinkering around, but I'm sure Mickey will find some other abusive combo to make us hate it.
All right, and then on the last on the docket is we have 10 warriors. So they changed it so now they have order hold the line. When this unit activates, target one enemy engaged with this unit. It suffers 2 hits plus 1 hit for each of this unit's remaining ranks. Basically, that's 5 auto hits in full rank. So 10, I think, was an awkward unit to bring in the previous edition, simply because it has sort of like a combination of things, which when you put together makes it a very mediocre tank. They don't tank well enough with their 4+ armor save. They don't hit really well because they're 4+ to hit. They don't have the speed because they have a speed of 5. So they were basically very sort of middle down the road unit that nobody really uses, and sort of like the only thing that you want to put it in is you put 10 in, you put Steer in because you want Steer to die because of like the last stand and to trigger some of his other cards. But yeah, now they added Hold the Line. Hold the Line isn't exactly a defensive ability. It's sort of like an incentive to get them into combat, and sort of like incentive for opponent to sort of not engage them if they can't really sort of deal enough damage to them, because they'll be taking like between 3 to 5 auto hits before they swing. And I think this is it's a lot of auto hits for a 5 point unit. So well, yeah. What do you think of these changes, Brett? Like, do you agree with the assessment that they were basically an awkward unit?
They were maybe a little bit awkward. I think ideally the goal was for taunt. You want to taunt a unit in, and then you want to expose their flanks to your other heavy hitters. Taunt, we won't really go into it. I know the general consensus is that taunt is a meme, but I see these guys having some play in a torment list, as we already mentioned, having counter assault. You can charge these guys in on your enemy's turn, activate them immediately. They've just been charged. Now they get 5 auto hits. Then you activate and you attack them again. It's going to be pretty hard for most things to live through that, especially if it's in the flank when they charge you. There's definitely some cool combos that can be had for these guys, but they are definitely fuel for coordination tactics, because getting use of that order twice in the round and out of 2 separate units, 5 auto hits is no joke, but even better than them being auto hits, they're not an attack. So they get around hardened, they get around resilience, and it's just generally 5 auto hits from a unit that's hitting on 4+ is just better than their attack is going to do. You're looking at 3 to 4 hits from, a 7 attack dice, 4+ to hit attack. The 5 auto hits just already is better, and it can't be weakened. Hold the line can't be weakened.
So yeah, consensus on free. I think this is the last unit for the free folk pass. I think consensus for free folk is that we're in an okay spot. I think this update opens up some new angles, especially with Mammoth. I think what I'm mostly interested in seeing is how Mammoth will sort of shake up the competitive meta, because it is a brand new unit. We don't know how yet it will perform. We're seeing Frozen Shore Chariot, for example, for 4 points being used simply because they're like a fast attack piece. And this is sort of like similar, well, not with the free maneuver, but just in general, it's similar in what it does, except it can tank a bit more. And yeah, so for me, I'm mostly excited in War Mammoth. The rest, I think it's okay. Changes to Trappers is nice. Changes to Weeper is nice. Changes to the Cart of Steer is also fine. I think overall, I think Free Folk will still be okay. Just that we lost a bit of sort of potential damage in Spearwise, but the extra vulnerable on the charge will make it nicer just in case your Warcry fail on the charge turn, which happens more often than not. So guaranteeing like a vulnerable token is definitely really, really good. All right, so we can conclude Free Folk. So now we will go with probably everyone's favorite faction, getting the sort of buff that they sorely need. But we'll see if they can make it into now sort of like the middle of the pack rather than sort of like the bottom of the pack, or will the changes just give them nothing? So let's talk about Baratheon. Where were Baratheon back in the previous one, in the 2021? Basically, for lack of better words, they're a bottom tier faction in general. They don't do a lot of things. They are severely under stats in a lot of different departments, and some of them are overcosted. We've seen the joke of a unit that is a Thorn Guard unit, which is a 7 point unit, and often they're compared to like Night Watch crossbows, Kings and Queens man basically doing nothing for 7 points, and yeah, it's just a lot of mishmash of units in Baratheon, which makes them sort of like the perfect mediocre faction that nobody really uses, but it is quite popular in like the casual games. So for you Baratheon fans out there, it is definitely a favorite faction. Have you ever played Baratheon in the previous edition, Brett?
Yeah, I played them locally.
But not
It was
competitively.
tough. Not competitively. I played them locally, which that's not to say that my local players aren't good. Um, they were just tough. In the competitive scene, it was really difficult to deal with all of that panic damage, and I found that panic just destroyed Baratheons. They look pretty solid now. Kind of scary in some ways. They're definitely like a specific play style. So I'm not entirely sure if you're like an aggressive player. I'm not sure that they're for you. They did get some buffs. They've got some potential to be aggressive, but I think they're still they're still a very grindy kind of faction. I think that's what they want to do. If you're expecting to play Baratheons and just go charge a bunch of stuff and kill it, I think they're probably not the faction for you.
So yeah, so that's Baratheon, basically the the sorry state of the Baratheon. So now we're seeing some changes in Baratheon. So first of all, let's go with the attachments. We got Red Priestess. Divine Sacrifice is modified. The costs associated with getting these effects are simply too high. Set costs have been removed, but also keeping versatility in the effect. What does that sentence even mean? So now it just says each time this unit attacks before rolling attack dice, it may suffer up to 2 wounds. If it does, for each wound it suffered, the defender becomes panicked or vulnerable. I still don't like it. Really, I still don't like it. I think for essentially Warcry, it's still an expensive cost to be bringing when you're auto wounding your own units. Perhaps there's something I'm missing here, but yeah, it's not Warcry. Even though it's confirmed token, but I think suffering 2 wounds for 2 tokens is simply a cost that's a bit too high. What do you think?
Mm, it's interesting. Um,
Yeah.
uh,
I know.
I can see it being, good with like Lightbringers or something. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we're all just spoiled by Warcry. I
Yeah.
don't think it's terrible.
I think Warcry simply is just the benchmark of 2 tokens for 1 point, and this is not 2 tokens for 1 point. It's more like, you know, I would even sort of argue that Earl units should have the Red Priestess for free, because you're essentially taking wounds, right? It's taking wounds in a game like Sif where you only have 12 wounds. Just taking 2 wounds for like a cost that's basically amounting to an extra couple of wounds also in the opponent, and the effect becomes sort of symmetrical, and it's not really good. You're paying points for that, and the output is not. So we're off to a rough start with Red Priestess, but I'm sure it will get better, right? Master Warden, stand your ground, replace with Order, hold the line. Yep. All right. This is fine. I think the same justification that they have for Chosen of Steer, simply because stand your ground is not used, charging is not, giving in flank and whatever bonus for charge is not significant. So hold the line, I think it's fine. Warden with Master Warden will deal a lot of damage, and you can't really sort of ignore them, which makes it fine. I don't think there's too much to talk about this. Now, NCU, big changes. Melisandre costs from 6 to 5. While powerful, Melisandre does come with a number of drawbacks. This is typically not something players to wish spend 6 points on, so we have maintained her power, but it reduces her cost to 5. So for 10 points, you get Mel and Jaqen. Are you at all worried with this change, Brett? I'm a little bit worried.
Yeah, I mean it's similar to 1.6 where Melisandre can have a field day. The effect is still pretty random. I think there are ways that you can mitigate her drawback. For example, running Dauntless in the Stannis unit, so that you're essentially trading 2 wounds for 1, and then you've got some really nice synergy with Baratheon Justice, which now always heals. And then there's a crazy good synergy with Baratheon Conviction, where if you own the crown, you panic with Melisandre, a unit that's engaged, they pass their morale test, and now you do the Melisandre panic, plus all units that are engaged take a panic test. So you can set off this kind of big chain of 2, 3, 4 panic tests. It's pretty good. If you're running Free Folk Insignificant spam without Mance,
You're nervous.
A lot of Greyjoy Archers, or Reavers with Vic, without Asha or something, there are definitely a lot of builds that need concern, because the popular meta choice is using cheap units to get activations up to leverage certain pieces to do most of your killing. If Melisandre can just poach and just devastate your cheap units and get them off of the table, you don't really have that activation advantage anymore. If you've got Mel Jaqen working, you can double zap Greyjoy bows, for example, for the cost of 2 wounds on your Stannis unit. You can do up to 10 wounds on the bowman. That's a bit too much even for Windermere to overcome, and then you get to do it all over again next round. So the popular 2 Greyjoy bowman build might be a little bit in jeopardy, actually, with a Mel, if Mel Jaqen are running around, as much as I'm sure they will be, because we saw Melisandre at 6 points. I think those players need to be a little bit concerned about how they're protecting their bowmen.
So you did mention that Baratheon Conviction and Justice has changed, so now we'll look at what changes. I think this is quite significant. For Conviction, it is now an auto heal 2 wounds. I think previously it's tied to like a letter of some sort, if I'm not mistaken. So now it's just auto to heal, and then you gain some extra benefit when you're holding the crown and when you're holding a letter. This is excellent though. If you control Crown, all enemies they are engaged with suffers panic test. And if you control Letter, each enemy they are engaged with gains one condition token. So it could be anything. Wow. I mean, this is a straight buff, and I think the heal too would be like the most important things because again, with the letters and the crown effect, I think it could be a slightly random to the well. By random, I mean it's not sometimes within your control when you're gonna make that morale test. Especially maybe if you're running Littlefinger, you can sort of confirm getting crown. But the heal two wounds is quite huge here, especially on units like when you're like Brett said, when you're passing the morale test from your own Malbomb, you get to heal two wounds, and that sort of just resets the damage to your own unit, and your opponents will take a lot of damage. On that note, we also have a buff to Baratheon Justice. Again, previously it was sort of like a meme card, you just sort of like use it, and now it's auto, panicked, and vulnerable. And if you control Letter or Crown, they also become weakened. So this is the wow, just tokens everywhere, and it's a lot of good changes here. Wow. Um, yeah, I like it, and of course, Final Strike is no longer a meme. I think we've discussed it in the Styre, but yeah, I think these two cards will give some additional resilience to the Baratheon build in general. Simply because I think the joke of like the Baratheon is that they're meant to be sort of like the frontline resilient faction, but what we're seeing is that a lot of these cards are heavily reliant on effects from like the tactics board, and also like some of them are sort of like in the um, sort of like on the onus of the opponent to do something about it. Now there are actually two things that makes Baratheon good. So not only that they have changes to like the basic tactic cards with like conviction, justice, and final strike, but also the rules of idle means death, meaning that back then you can just sort of like pass not to trigger any of their cards. Now you have to either attack or retreat, and I think this is probably the kicker. Yeah, I think a lot of Baratheon players are happy now that they actually get to be attacked, and rather than just like I activate my unit, I don't want to attack you because I don't want to trigger your cards, and then just pass turn while still contesting the objective. So just two huge changes for like the basic of Baratheon, and now that's not all. You also still have some more buffs coming up. But yeah, I think the design intention of Baratheon is pretty straightforward from the dev here. I think they identified that there's just simply not enough resilient in Baratheon, and they're just adding a few stuff to make them more sticky. Um, what are your thoughts on like the tactics card change here?
No, they're solid. They're just basically overall buffs. Um, does it push Baratheons immediately into like a top three spot? Probably not. Maybe. Champions of the Stag are super scary. I think we need to see. I think the biggest thing for Baratheons that has me excited personally is at least the potential to maybe shift some of the meta a little bit, because I was discussing this with some of the guys from Canada. Even if the fear of Melisandre pushes, for example, Greyjoys into bringing Asha as one of their commanders, this makes me happy, because it gets rid of the mandatory Baelor um, and Dagmar combo. um, if it makes people reconsider what I mentioned already, which is they're kind of spamming activation lists, then it's done plenty of service for the meta. And this could be one of those things where if it triggers meta changes, you could see a lot of ripple effects where certain things get a buff because of these changes. Like if we see less 8 activation spammy kind of builds, then maybe more elite units become popular and better. It's all yet to be seen. I've looked at this and I can't digest all of it. I don't know how good Melisandre will be. I would have to test it out to see how Mel and Jaqen do against non-Mance free folk, as if something like that even existed, and against Greyjoys. I would want to see how it works. I don't think you're seeing 2-3 conscripts anymore from Night's Watch, so I don't think it's really scaring Night's Watch away from what they want to run. They're still a Morale 5 army for the most part that's a 50-50 chance to pass. but it could. I mean, if Night's Watch still runs two elite units and fills out with solos, she's not going to target and kill the solos probably, but she can definitely do some damage to those more elite units. Double bombing John Hunters. If they don't have conscripts on standby to heal, it could become problematic for them. So we really just have to see, and it could be interesting. I think Hold the Line is very, very strong. I think with the nerf to Blood Riders, it could definitely give them some play into Targaryens. The scariest stuff that we've seen from Targaryens, besides dragons, who obviously got a nerf. But even if you talk about dragons don't want to deal with Hold the Line. Screamers don't want to deal with Hold the Line. Unsullied pikemen with Officer don't want to deal with Hold the Line because it gets past shield wall. Veterans and Blood Riders, if they're unable to self-heal, you could start to kind of ping and get them down as well. It could be interesting. It's interesting. I think Hold the Line, if you squeeze it in lists, I think it definitely has some meta affecting effects. I think it can make people reconsider things.
Yep. So let's just go quickly through some of the changes as well. Queen's Men, the unit that actually has been sitting in my desk for the last 1 year as I refuse to paint them. It's literally just here waiting for me to paint. We're now probably gonna see a coat of paint now that has been sitting for the desk for 1 year, because finally we get the buff to Queen's Men. And the buff to Queen's Men, which also applicable to King's Men, is that the To the Last is completely changed. The concept is still the same. It protects the units from being destroyed. But back then, you also get a panicked and vulnerable token on top of it, which leads to, for example, if you get destroyed by damage, you get revive, you take a panic token, and then you still need to make the roll to see if you survive or not from the panic test. And with the panic token, it's a higher chance for them to just perish. To the Last now guarantees that it is not destroyed with some morale test, which again, if you fail this, I think you can still test again, right, Brett?
Yes.
Yeah. But essentially, yeah. So it also protects you from, like, sort of, I guess, unfortunate roll if you have a morale of 5. Also, the morale becomes from 6 to 5, so this is also like a buff to Queen's Men. So yeah, to the King's Men as well, to the Last, and no changes in the stats. So these two will probably now start to see play, I feel, with the To the Last changes. And again, I'm just excited in actually bringing these units onto the field. I think the sculpt wise, I think they're some of the coolest sculpt that Baratheon has right now. And I have them painted, at least the King's Men, for like a good 1 year. Actually didn't bring them to the table at all because, they're simply not a good unit. But now with To the Last, now they can actually have some decent usage. Yeah, not much comment from me on this King and Queen's Men. I think people are overly excited, but again, there's still a unit that it costs you, I think, 7 to play. They do need to put in a lot of work for them to sort of bring back the point cost associated with them. But now that it's no longer a meme, when they got destroyed, they take a panic. They're not destroyed, and then you get tokens. Now they're just auto revive, which is pretty cool. Champions of the Stack get a straight buff. The morale changes from 6 to 5. And I think Champion strat has changed now that Defender becomes vulnerable when they're engaged with the Champion of Stag. Again, pushing up the damage of the Champion of Stag into something that's a bit more palatable. And lastly, the 2 changes from the Baratheon roster is the 6-point changes to Thornwatch. Again, yep, I mean, this unit is sort of like the benchmark of like the joke unit of Baratheon at 7 points, but now at 6 points they might see some play. And then lastly, with the Roar Lightbringers, they went from 7 points to now 6 points, becoming on par with sort of like the other archers of the unit. But yeah, overall, just straight up buffs in Baratheon here. Out of the 5 unit changes, like, what do you think is the most sort of impactful for like a Baratheon list, at least from like a unit perspective?
I think the stealth kind of really big change is the change to the trigger for Queensmen, because now it's when you attack any Raylor unit and Melisandre, when she influences, she makes a unit Raylor. But with Lightbringers costing 6 points, you're definitely going to be getting rid of Lightbringers. You have to get rid of Lightbringers. They will shoot you and splash panic damage you in a really bad way. So there's definitely, if you park the Queensmen close to the Lightbringers, just within short range, I think you will find that it's easy to get those cards at least once per round. And with as good as both of those cards are, specifically having synergy with the Melisandre combo and the Stannis side, I think Queensmen are going to give people fits. And you have a little bit of a tough choice because they're not exactly an easy unit to kill, but you kind of want to stop that card farming. But simultaneously going after the Lightbringers or going after the champions of the stag influenced by Melisandre or whatever the case may be, even a Dragonstone noble influenced by Melisandre is something that you have to go get rid of, because if he's down to 1 wound, he's a little torpedo. So you'll definitely be able to get those cards into play, and I think you're going to find that even just those little 2 wound heals here and there are big in an army like Baratheon, where they're already defensive and hard to get rid of.
It's like, for example, with the Queensmen, right? You get punch, you fetch up I think Conviction is the heal. Yeah, you fetch up Conviction, and then you get punch because they have a morale of 5+. They survive the morale test, and then they heal 2. And then you can just cycle them. Yeah, really exciting. I think the majority of changes to Queensman is, I think the buff is even like triple in a sense, right? You get a change up to the last, and then you also get like a change to Conviction, and you get a change to Justice. So all these packages are making Queensman now actually sort of a viable choice when putting your commander even in Queensman, or just sort of like a bulk of your army to basically sustain in the face of like upcoming onslaught. But yeah, I like it. Kingsman, I think also
Did you mention that Queensman got a buff to morale 5?
Yeah. And again, like I said, you take the damage, you roll a morale test because their morale is now 5. It's an easier time to use the Conviction. So yeah, overall pretty good. I like also the changes to the Champion of Stag. I think back then, Champion of the Stag is one of those units that you just sort of ignore. Because they punch like 7 dice, 3+. Ooh, big deal. And now with the Vulnerable, they might actually cause some concern for the opponent. Because now they'll be punching 7 dice with Vulnerable. And I think that sort of will give some pause to like some lightly armored units. They're still quite expensive. But now with the morale of 5 and 2+, I think they'll be extremely hard to take down without like auto wounds. And again, finally happy to see my champ stack out in droves. So yeah, we'll see how this unit will perform in the near future. Good things with Baratheon here. Overall, I'm extremely excited for Baratheon. Mel changes, Lightbringer changes, Queensman changes, and the changes to the basic deck, and just in general how the game is played. Now that you can't just activate do nothing, now you just have to sort of either retreat or punch, which plays into the Baratheon gameplay really, really well. Hoping to see more players of Baratheon in like tournaments. I think that's the overall goal of this. One of the overall goals of this update, right? Just to make every faction, every unit viable. And I hope with this we'll increase some diversity in the player experience here with the Baratheon. So we're done with Baratheon. Wow, that was a lot of changes, but I think it's quite a straight up buff. There's not gonna be a lot of different changes in how you play Baratheon. It's just gonna be a lot of these units will now have some reduced points, so you can bring in like some extra attachment. I think my favorite combo is Davos and Lightbringer, which is an 8 points unit. Now it's just 7 points, which is quite decent still. You can also even bring Lightbringer with Braun. Ooh man, 7 points for a double tap unit. I like me like Braun with Lightbringer. Definitely.
Yeah, and potentially a 3+ defense and 5+ morale on an archer unit.
On an archer unit, yeah.
Deal with.
Yeah, you deal with that. All right, onwards to the last faction that we'll be talking about. I think there's not a lot of changes to this. Well, there is like one major changes to this faction, but I think let's go through like why House Targaryen was back then. The crutch of Targaryen, I think, started out with dragons, right? I think even up until right now, dragons are still causing a lot of headaches to both gameplay wise and also design wise. Because how do you design a unit that's essentially is the equivalent of like an attack helicopter in like the medieval age, right? It's a little bit difficult both from like a lore standpoint and also from like a design standpoint. Like how do you sort of balance this type of unit? And Dragon has gone through like a lot of different variants over the last couple of years even. Um, and now there's a few nerf to dragons, especially with the Mother of Dragons. So, can you just help me clarify what does this mean? Does the Mother of Dragon simply does not exist, or the card that gives the discount does not exist?
The card that gives the discount doesn't exist. The card that gives the discount and mandates 3 dragons
Does not exist.
So
All right.
essentially, you can run MOD and
Just one dragon, right? You can bring MOD with one dragon.
You can run MOD with 1 dragon. You can run MOD with 2 dragons, or you can run an MOD with 3. You're just not getting. I think kind of people's complaint with MOD, besides the obvious negative play experience from auto wounds, was that it's essentially 43 points versus 40.
Mm-hmm.
Because the dragons get a discount. Dragons are definitely worth 8 points on their own. So they've removed that, but it does open up some list building. It opens up some flexibility. And again, obviously I have tons of conversation with tons of people. And I know lots of Targ players, but interestingly, I think that this could be a little bit of a buff or a reason to actually bring Viserion. I think overall he was considered the worst option, particularly with MOD, because you're just not using the vulnerable token. However, now, if you build a list around, say, Viserion and Rhaegal, you can bring like a unit of Outriders, or you can bring some veterans, and they'll be able to take advantage of that vulnerable token. And I think it mitigates some of the drawback of dragons doing D3 plus wounds remaining, because you can open up with a charge from Viserion, do D3 plus 3 wounds, make them vulnerable, and then they're very much in the realm of being finished off by a unit of Outriders with their shot because of that vulnerable token. So it's interesting. I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh, Mother of Dragons is so much better now because of this. Like, it was definitely a change to improve the play experience for opponents of Mother of Dragons. It was not in any way meant to buff them. However, it adds some flexibility. I mean, Danny's cards focus around dragons, of course, but I mean, even 1 or 2 dragons with a deck built around them, if you play well, you position well, and you leverage some of the other things that Targaryens have going for them, it's not unplayable. It's not the end of the world. Mother of Dragons doesn't get relinquished to the shelf. She's never going to be played. It's not like dragons are never going to be played. They're just more fair. It's a period of adjustment for Targaryen players. I think they're justifiably maybe a little bit upset because there are legitimately people who strictly played waiting for dragons. They love dragons. It's not because dragons beat everybody's face in. They just love dragons. So I feel for them on that point, but it's not the end of the world. There is definitely still some play.
Yep. All right. So let's going through the list here. Unsullied Captain, Order Relentless modified. I think this is I think it was meant to be the way that it was meant to play. I think especially for Targaryen, it wasn't really sort of abused in a way that Greyjoy nor Nightwatch uses it. But just overall Relentless has changed. I think nobody will cry over that. Jorah Mormont the Andal, unit attachment restriction removed. I think back then, if I'm not mistaken, you can't put 2 attachment in this, so it makes the disabilities a bit awkward. So now you can put Jorah and whatever you're trying to put on the other one as well, if I'm not mistaken. This is a fairly minor buff. I don't think Jorah the Andal was even being played to some extent. Now that you can also just attach him on a unit, I think it's fine, but nobody was really using him. At least not his attachment version anyway. We got Hago. Hago is changed from To the Last. Hold on. Changed from To the Last. Now it Field with Slaughter. With the design notes that To the Last was proving too impactful on cavalry options. So replaced on Hago with Field by Slaughter. Yeah, I mean, this is a straightforward okay. having a cavalry unit running around with essentially 3 lives is it's pretty scary. And now we go on to the big changes. Dragons, Drogon, Rhaegal, Viserion, attacks modified. This changes apply to all 3 dragons. Their attack was reduced from D3 plus 3 wounds to D3 plus 1 wound for each of the remaining rank in the defending unit. This was done to give better scaling to damage and tone its raw destructive power down, and they still remain one of the highest sources of direct wounds in the game. I think, yeah, what you were saying, this was difficult, yeah. If I were stuck in the position of the developers and I have to sort of design a dragon, right? Like, how do you create dragon to be both scary and also balanced? And like I mentioned earlier, they sort of went on like several different iterations of this dragon, and now this is sort of like the third variant of it. And now it just says the defender suffered D3 wounds plus 1 wound for each of his remaining ranks. So on full ranks, it can deal a maximum of 6 wounds with vicious. So we're looking at like 9 wounds. But on the last rank, it will suffer D3 wounds plus 1. So it sort of scales down a bit. No longer dragon can do like sort of like a double tap on like enemy unit. They sort of have to be extremely lucky with the D3 to be able to double tap units now. And also, when hitting giants will only suffer 4 wounds. 4 wounds, and then okay, giants can still be one shot. Never mind. I got excited for a second, but giants can still be one shot. Boo hoo hoo.
Yeah. Drogon being your best.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this yeah, I'm not going to envy someone in the position of designing dragons, because I think whatever you do to dragons will attract some sort of comments, right? Because it's just a very difficult unit to design. It's like, how do you design a unit that's essentially a mythical being in like a war game, right? It's quite difficult.
I feel like dragons are definitely in their best spot now. I know that Targaryen players aren't going to agree with me. They're probably cussing me out right now. I mean, I play Targaryens a little bit too, so, you know, I just didn't run dragons even before this change. Not just for the negative play experience, it's just they're very much like either you table or things go bad, you have a hard counter, and they just get wrecked. But even with that in consideration, I think they're in their best spot. You could end up seeing, I'm not really sure, we'll have to see how this plays out. My theory, again, being that they're in their best spot and everything's fine. But if for some reason they prove, you know, dragons are a little bit underpowered or something like this, or they're not being picked, you might end up seeing them go through kind of like a dire wolf / mammoth transition until they hit the sweet spot. I think they nailed it with dire wolves. Finally, they went from never giving up VP, giving up VP, to what they are now. So I guess that's only 3 changes. Dragons have gone no ranged attack. Yeah, this is only the second version. So you could potentially see, and you could see that maybe they go the route of cheap solo. And this was kind of the vision I had for them when they started talking about dragons being released. I thought that they would either be a companion attachment to Dany that just did D3 wounds per attack Dany's unit makes, similar to Gregor.
Oh, that's cool.
Which I think another compromised cool design space would be dragons at like 3 or 4 points. They're a solo tray. They have, you know, some stat lines similar to dire wolves, 4 wounds, but they just do auto wounds when they charge you, and maybe it's D3 plus 1 or it's something like that. That for me would be a very happy place, but I'm happy with the spot that they're in right now. So let's see how it shakes out.
Yeah, I mean, like, my biggest sort of vocal opinion on like Targaryen comes from Kai, and he's not a huge fan of dragons, simply because, well, he's a huge fan of the Dothraki, number one, and I think he feels that dragon is simply just, you know, he didn't really feel dragon. He's used to running just one dragon, Drogon, in his list, just to sort of like an armor cracker, just going through like things like Harden, going through things like Shield Wall with Drogon, just to get that assurance of the double tap. Now that the double tap option is still around, but not going to be as consistent as it was before, so this might be a bit of a changes to that list. And I think overall he's going to be pretty happy with, you know, so that people basically people will hopefully stop complaining when someone brings dragons, right? That's also part and parcel of what the change to the dragons would be, so that people can stop complaining, going like, "Oh my god, you're bringing dragons." So we'll see. Unsullied Swordmasters, point change, just to be in line with their Pikeman brothers. But I think I still agree that Pikeman is still like probably the better option, simply because of Shield Wall and Set for Charge in combination is extremely powerful for 7 points. But a Swordmaster has been changed to 7 points, and now you can sort of bring like Swordmaster plus Pikeman instead of like double Pikeman. But yeah, I don't think this will change significantly, but people might be compelled to bring Swordmasters to sort of just to complement the Pikemen. And then lastly, the changes to Drogo's Blood Riders. I think they removed the Fueled by Slaughter, which gives them an auto wound every time they destroy something, or if they attack someone with with less rank. Well, sorry, I forgot what the wording for Fueled by Slaughter is, but it sort of auto heals depending on what the missing rank is. Now it's no longer there, which sort of like, I have a huge complaint of Blood Riders in general. I really don't like the design of the unit, simply because they just do too many for like a unit. They have 3+ armor save, they have 5+ morale with Iron Resolve, so makes them 4+ because Drogo will need to be attached to them. They can kill attachment because of Drogo. They have a speed of 6. They have a good non-decaying attack profile. They can do Warcry and they can heal. So it's just too much for one unit to do, and they simply want to do everything, and they can do everything. So I still don't like the design of Blood Riders. The removal of the Fueled by Slaughter, I think, is fair. Again, Targaryen went from like a faction without very good healing. I remember because they were meant to be sort of like the fast hit and run faction. Targaryen brings Tycho simply because they're like the best sort of at patching up whatever damage that they can do before they can punch back straight. But now with like things like Unsullied Pikemen, Illyrio, and it used to have Fueled by Slaughter, it became sort of like the weird sustain faction. Now, without Fueled by Slaughter, I think they have slightly less survivability, but not by much. It's still a very powerful combat unit at 3+ armor save and essentially 4+ morale save. Yeah, I still don't like Blood Riders, but yeah, I think this was sort of warranted, yeah, Brett, because it was simply doing too much for what it does, for like an 8 points.
The Blood Riders with Fueled by Slaughter, it was just, it was absurd. That's, even you take into consideration Assault Orders giving Drogo the charge, which is a heal, and then if not, he's just so good in the grind with the ability to heal with Fueled by Slaughter, mixing him with Khaleesi, giving him rerolls, taking away weakened tokens and things like this. They were just a unit that was absolutely ridiculous, and I played them a lot, and I ended up with like a 50% win rate with Targaryens, which is really bad. Like, I'm very ashamed of myself, but most of the time I could just recklessly throw Khal Drogo in, and there was just nothing they could do about him. The best that they could hope for was a player like Camille tied him up with Flademan and used Pycelle to weaken him and keep Drogo tied up long enough to win by objectives. I'm glad that they got some change, because they were just way overpowered before.
So this was
and I think they're still really good.
So this was what Kai sort of was talking about Blood Riders, and sort of like his approach of like Blood Riders. I think like back then, when you have 2 points riding on your commander, so the decision to put Drogo in Blood Rider is an 8 points unit that will need to effectively win the game at that point. Because back then, like, the option to put Drogo was in Screamers, and I think you can sort of like justify putting Drogo in like a back objective or like a mid objective just to sort of farm points. But with like an 8 points, they suddenly become too expensive for him to sort of just hang back around objectives, so they become the unit that you throw into the opponent. Back then, you were using Flateman with Drogo, which sort of breaks everyone's immersion with the game, because Drogo with Flateman is just lore-wise strong. Now with his Blood Rider, which essentially has the survivability of the Flateman with 3+ armor save and a good morale with sort of like good attack as well. Um, and now with the changes to commander in general, now that your commander is no longer earning 2 points, you can now just throw Drogo into like the thick of things, and we'll see if he can come out on top from that. So I like the changes overall here to the Blood Riders. I still don't like the design of the unit in general. I think having an innate 3+ armor safe unit in Targaryen feels wrong. Just from like a design perspective, and the thought that these guys are wearing essentially nothing, and then they're charging into the battlefield, and they have like the armor safe of like a full knight in armor, a knight in full plate. That also gives me like some fits. I know that armor in this game is sort of like abstract, that it also means like agility and stuff, but yeah, it feels, huh? Kind of a deal. So yeah, any closing thoughts for Targaryen? I think like the changes are pretty makes sense, and sort of in line with what they were trying to do with Targaryens in general. What do you think of Targaryens now?
I think they're definitely more fair. Drogo's, I mean, in reality, let's be realistic and talk how we know the game gets played. Um, Most likely, Drogo will just move back to Flademan. It will just be business as usual, as it was before Blood Riders even came into the equation. If anything, Targaryens have less predators to worry about. That whole Targaryens versus double crossbows rivalry seems to be over, because that double crossbow build, you will just lose. If you run that today, you will lose probably every game. Plus, not to mention that list is more or less over by 2 points, most of the time 3, because of changed conscripts and Tycho. It's just not a thing. So Drogo back in Flademan, you literally just run exactly what you've been running. You just can't pair it with MOD. I think at this point, in order to deal with kind of the quote-unquote Targaryen problem, we're relying on some other factions to hard counter them, because for the most part, that Drogo list is still going to be very dominant. It doesn't change much, if anything, for Targaryens. We're going to have to hope that Tywin MCU and Knights of Castle Rock can just continue dunking on Drogo and, make it to where this isn't just the auto build, auto include. I think you're going to see tons of Grey Worm Drogo pairings, maybe with the change to Sword Masters and rewarding aggressive commanders. Targaryens might lean into Belwas in Sword Masters. Belwas does have Hardened. I tend to believe that commanders with Hardened are just good commanders because it's hardened for free. You plug them into an offensive unit, and now you have a dual purpose. Illyrio Belwas with Sword Masters and some of his retribution cards. It could be a thing. I think it's worth checking out. So I don't know. In my opinion, Targaryens are still going to be very, very good. It's not like this knocked them off a pedestal and they fall to mid-tier or anything. They're still going to be scary. And in a lot of ways, Drogo Flademan was scarier than Drogo Blood Riders because of that auto wound and always taking that -3 panic test. Just sucked so bad.
All right. So let's go to the last part, which is Greyjoy. Just 2 units changes. So Greyjoy, this is gonna be the fastest segment in this particular stream. So the comments for Greyjoy is just Order Relentless modified and To the Last modified. Yeah, so just buffs to Greyjoy, easy. Bowman is still a problem. I think Bowman in general will still be like the Greyjoy, sort of like the shtick. Yeah, I'm not sure like what Greyjoy. I think Greyjoy will still need some modification in general. I feel like Greyjoy is still like extremely powerful now. With the changes that Greyjoy now has, basically there's no changes. It's just a straight buff to Baelor Blacktide. I know Baelor Blacktide is not probably being used over like the most common sort of Asha pairings. And Victarion Greyjoy Order Relentless is modified. So now it sort of just removes him from the Bowman plus Vicky build, but it still unlocks the Vicky plus Reaver build, which is still just an 8 points of punch. Yeah, just Greyjoy in general, I don't think there's much to be talked about here. I hope they're gonna be looked at in sometime soon, hopefully. But so far, right now in this changes, they're not being changed at all, essentially. Well, what is your thought on this?
Yeah, I mean, I have some concerns about Greyjoys. I'm a little bit surprised that the archers didn't at least get, a change to like a 6+ defense or something.
Mm-hmm.
I'm surprised that Asha stayed at 1 point. She is, in my opinion, she is the best 1 point attachment in the game, and
Yep.
it's just not even close. What she does for that unit of trappers is just nuts. Um, my prediction is that combination will not survive the next patch when, a year from now or whenever it happens.
A year
There's just
from
no
now,
way.
so I have to deal with Mikkel
Who
heckling me
knows?
for a year. Ha.
Who knows? It's gonna be Asha trappers everywhere.
I mean,
That unit
if
is
it
just
wasn't
such a
already was, right?
yeah, it's such a pain in the ass to deal with. And then I think the biggest thing out of all of this is I think Baelor Blacktide in Silenced Men is just insane. I played 6 Greyjoy games. I'm 6-0. I think I've done 3 or 4 that are on stats, mind you. I do still play locally. They don't always make it to stats. But I think my 4 games that I played on stats with Baelor, I lost maybe a combined 2 units, but there were some games that I didn't lose anything. Just with all of that healing and the fact that, Baelor right up the gut, the bubble of trouble, double bowman, and it's just so hard to deal with. I think actually Chris and I played a mirror match and he destroyed Asha Trappers and the non-Baelor Silence Men, so I misspoke there. But I know I played Free Folk a couple of times and it was just a bloodbath. I mean, the Free Folk just died everywhere. So I don't know. I know Tywin NCU again, and I hate always bringing him up, but he's such a good counter to certain stuff. Tywin NCU set up for Flademan can one-shot Asha Trappers. That really helps start to allow you to focus on other things. Other than that, I don't know who's gonna help us navigate the Greyjoys.
Yeah. I mean,
I think Hold the Line helps a little bit because it gets past Baelor's Hardened. Unfortunately, Blind Baron, they left him as he is, and as he is,
giant wound profile, baby.
God, he will have Hold the Line. He will have counter strikes and everything. It's just so crazy good. I don't know who's bailing us out of this Greyjoy problem. we as a meta, we need to come together and find the predator for Greyjoys and shove it down their throat. Because until then, I just see Greyjoys being #1 faction, and I don't think there's
not
no
close
doubt in my mind that they're just the #1 faction. It's Blind Baron, it's Baelor, it's Dagmar. If Melisandre scares them, they can just lean into Asha.
Yeah.
Will that be successful? I don't know. It's yet to be seen. But for right now, Greyjoys look. It's the buff by idle, right? It's the buff by no nerf.
Mm-hmm.
They're benefiting from big predators being nerfed, and they got buffed in the sense that they didn't get nerfs themselves. So I see Greyjoys comfortably taking that #1 spot right now, and I predict Mance, Baelor, and probably Drogo. They might be your top 3. Jon Snow's in there as well. He didn't get too much of a change. Those are my predictions for your big powerhouse commander.
Whoa, spicy takes in like the.
Put Greyjoy Umber in the hat as a question mark in parentheses. Berserker Tactics with Asha returning it mixed with Tully Cat.
Hey! Berserker Tactics with Tully Calf.
That is so disgusting. I know everybody's talking about it.
It's so good.
She-bears, it's so good. They have she-bears for Warcry. It is not out of the realm of possibility to one-shot anything with a 4+ defense or worse.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think you did mention it, that now Knights with Tywin is probably a guaranteed kill on anything. Probably. Mm-hmm. Like, you just give Panicked and Vulnerable on, like, a unit being charged by the Knights. And then you can probably, like, left out the blank and auto-hit to something else. But yeah, I mean, we're gonna...
If you have a hear me roar, they fucked.
It's a good chance of dying. Yeah. You know. Look, I think this patch is probably one of the best patch we've seen in a while.
Mhm.
Just on like how everything is being looked at, how everything's being sort of evaluated, and sort of like we get a good insight of how the devs are looking at it, and they're keeping a good pulse on the game. Just that some are sort of slipping out from their grasp. Like definitely Greyjoys will need to be looked at quite closely within the next couple of months. Some of the tweaks and changes with like Landscape also might have some unintended consequences of making one shot back in the game. I know that the intention of the dev was to sort of like not make one shot like a thing anymore, but now with like Landscape being Landscape again, they might go back to the realms of one shot, especially with Berserker tactics and some additional things that was being buffed. So I think overall it's a great hope for the game. Having a lot of different faction now becoming viable, especially with the Baratheon Van Boys now being excited with all the new kings and queensmen and everything. I think overall it's a great patch. I personally can't wait to play it. The only downside is that right now we can't because of Omicron is scary. So we might need to either play in TTS or we'll just see some games being played, and hopefully you stay safe too, Brett. I think Omicron is kind of scary now. I'm not sure how it is in the States right now. It's probably better. It's probably worse. I'm not too sure.
It it's prevalent. The symptoms, for the most part, seem to be a little bit worse.
Hmm.
I'm muted. Sorry. I What part did I cut myself off?
No,
Okay.
just the whole, just the whole.
It, it's more prevalent. The symptoms seem to be a little bit less severe. Unfortunately, I already had it earlier this year. I had one day where I felt like the only possible thing that I could do is sleep, and then after I broke the fever, it wasn't too bad. But I'm definitely no doctor. Coronavirus is still a thing, and we'll have to see how everything goes with that.
So yeah,
But
mhm.
no, that's it. I guess I'm just gonna go fix some trucks now.
All right. So to those still watching, and later on, this will be on VOD in YouTube. So thank you, Brett, again. I'm gonna let you off to go do your work now, and I'm
Okay.
gonna get some shut eye because it's 11:30. It's been a long day, and hope you guys stay tuned for some more videos. I think I'm not sure if we can get some physical recording. We might do so with like very limited scope, but hopefully we can get some games in with the next couple of weeks. And stay testing, and hope you're excited as us with the patch. Thank you, Brett. Have a good rest of the day.
All right, buddy. See ya.
See ya. Bye, everyone.